We're going to talk about specific principles regarding scientific research. So this is going to be about how to become familiar with a topic that you are not familiar with relatively quick. And this is something that you can do, okay? And where to find the sources, whatever. Now, I'm just using a fictive topic that nobody uses. So therefore, because I don't want you to adapt the content that I use, you might use the same content. So if I take something from time series, you might use that as a tool yourself, which I don't want to. Okay, so I want you basically to prevent this. But the question would be how to to become familiar with things that you're not familiar with. And I use basically, let's say, social network site usage and depression as an example. This is more or less related to psychology, so it's not your field, but it could be your field basically. But it's empirical, so at least you might use some statistics there. And I will show you how to basically to get information about the topic. Now, the first page that you can use, I don't want to basically advertise, Google. This is the last thing that I would do actually, but this is a good one. So if you use scholar.google.com or .de, whatever, this search engine would generate you scientific papers and scientific papers only. So you don't find anything else other than scientific papers, and you find a lot of them. Okay, because anything else from the internet is, 99.9%, what is written on the internet, it's, I don't want to say crap, but yeah, I do say crap. So, maybe regarding scientific papers, it's just 95%. So it's a slightly better ratio, right? But you can be sure that most of the time you're going to find sources that are going to be scientific. All right, so you use that one again. So I don't want to advertise Google, but it looks like just regular Google. So at the first, when you look at, for the first time, you don't recognize any difference, I think, so kind of looking like that, but you don't you see any difference, whatever. And then you can use your filters, year of appearance, whatnot. So what I did is basically was typing Facebook depression here. And I was checking the sources, what I got. So these are the things that you would get. Okay, so this is the first paper that I was, these are the screenshots that I'm presenting right now. So again, these are the sources. Here you can get those directly most of the time, okay? And other than that, if it's missing, there is tools to get those papers also. Okay, if you basically use your account, you might have a direct impact because your university is buying the journals. Okay, so there is a possibility that you get direct access to this paper, although basically here it is missing. But again, if you use your account from university, there is a great chance that you'll have direct access to the journal. If you don't have access to a journal that you want to have access to, just let me know and I will help you. Okay, so I'm going to help you to get access to it. Okay, but this is just a side note. All right, so you can get basically every paper there is. All right, for free. So again, you pay your fees, so that's what it is. All right, but most of the time there is direct access provided here. Maybe it's just a preliminary version, but it's still a version that you can use. And the one indicator that I use basically is the number of citations. Okay, so let's say if the number of citations exceeds 30, 40 maybe, then it tends to be a good source. Okay, you don't need to use the basically journal rankings and all that stuff because the journal rankings are also based on citations. Of course, you need to check, the year of appearance as well. So if it came out, let's say 2019, then the number of citations cannot be that high as if it was coming out year 2013, 10 years ago. You understand that, guys? Okay, so if it came out yesterday, there is no chance probably that 2,000 people are going to quote it, all right? So you need to put that basically into, you need to look at that number of citations versus the year that it was coming out, okay? So the publication year. And based on that, you can get a good indicator how good your source is. You can also, again, check your journal rankings and stuff, but that's something that, again, in the seminar, you don't really need to, okay? It depends also on the field that you are basically considering. Okay, so just because the journal is not ranked that too high basically on the first side, it doesn't mean that within a subfield, okay, it cannot be the case. So in every subfield there is, let's say, a top journal, and it could be basically at the bottom of a list, all right, but it could be still at the top journal on that field. Okay, so there are multiple basically measures that you can use, but again, one of them is the number of citations, and I think that's going to be an important one. All right. Now, again, so if you have, let's say, for example, 639 quotations, you can be almost sure. I mean, that's a good one. So I think it's a good indicator that this is a good source. All right, but you can use any filter, okay, that you can have. I mean, you can just basically since time. You want the papers appearing since 2021, 22 or something. Just use that filter. So you can. I mean, I don't need to explain to you how to use a search engine, right? So probably you're going to find it out for yourself. But again, you are going to have listed scientific papers only, and that you can select from. Anyways, so again, indicators or number of citations. That's a good one, which I use. The journal impact matrix, but again, the journal impact matrix themselves are based on number of citations. Okay, so that comes after. But it's not necessarily the case though. So again, there is not a perfect measure. There is multiple measures that you can look at. Okay. Then you also become familiar with the names of the researchers. Okay. So there is always a guru in every field, and so after a while you're going to recognize these authors as well. So things that you can basically need to consider. The number of citations can depend on the publication year, of course, and I mentioned that before. Again, if it came out yesterday, the number of citations cannot be that high, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that it's not a good paper. So then it would look at maybe the journal impact factor rather than number of citations. Or basically, you need to basically be familiar with that. The review article tends to be cited more often. Okay, so that's also a case, right? Probably, I mean, I don't know what source you got, but if there is a collection of papers that it's very popular, if somebody does the job for you, okay, so pre-selecting the papers for you and presenting it, so that's very popular. Now there's always a practice of self-citing, which is not uncommon, by the way. Okay, so where authors quote themselves to get a higher impact, impact factor, but that's a practice that's quite known. Or they do it in circles. Okay, so A quotes B, B quotes C, C quotes A, and they do this all the time, and they themselves generate a little, higher impact factor than usually would be. All right. Now, journals require adding citations to articles that appear on that journal sometimes. So if let's say you want to submit it to a journal, but you don't quote the journal itself, so, and again, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So again, I would recommend to use that. Specific fields can be poorly represented, although it can have a great impact factor. So things that you would need to consider that as well. And international journal coverage, poorly represented. It's if I international, I don't mean the United States. Okay, so that's let's say the area of dominance in that regard. And if you say, okay, you look at, for example, XYZ from abroad, if I say from abroad, I mean outside the United States, that's going to have a lower impact, but it's going to be poorly represented. But again, these are just tendencies. And if results are significant, this is what I want to also add here. This is let's say, the positive bias. So if basically there is significance between two variables in empirical study, chances are greater that it's going to be published than rather it's not. So there is also bias regarding basically significance between variables of any sort. Anything. So you need to understand that basically disciplines with traditional fewer journals having a disadvantage. Again, this was indicating before. Particular metrics may not include certain journals of certain topics. So again, there is not a perfect measure. So whether a source is, let's say, a good one or not, depends on multiple things, not just basically on the things that I mentioned. You need to understand that researchers cannot stand each other. I mean, there is just a tendency. Okay, so A doesn't like B, B doesn't like C, and so on. They compete, so they try to basically criticize among. There is a certain level of narcissism that you need to be familiar with. So these are things that you would need to consider. But I'm not sure whether this is going to be reflected in your seminar work. But maybe if you go deeper, you're going to notice those things. Anyway, so let's say, okay, you can select a source randomly. Let's say if it has a certain number of citations, whatever. I chose that one, okay? So just an example, but you can choose any other if you write about the topic. And then just, what I want you to basically to look at is the things that are important is just basically the abstract, which is important. So there's a little summary there. And so it even summarized for you. And if you read the abstract, I want you to basically to summarize 3 basic ideas that the paper is about. And that's it. Okay, that would be a good start. Of course, you can go into the details later on, but for every paper that you came across with, I want you to basically just summarize maybe 3 major ideas that the paper is about. And that would be a good start. So then you can basically structure it better if you know what these things are about, because you're not supposed to underestimate who has written what and how to put that together. So structuring it is just as difficult as, you know, becoming familiar with the topic. But I think even structuring it for your seminar paper is more difficult than becoming familiar with about the results that you are seeing. So again, I want you to summarize basically 3 major ideas. That's it, not more. And you can do that by just reading the abstract. Maybe the introduction, maybe 1.5, maybe 2 pages, but not more. So keep that aside just for a moment and come back to it later, because you would need to understand those things. And it's going to be summarized, background, method, results. Again, so if you look carefully, you can, limitations maybe. So this has been done for you. So at the beginning, you don't really need to read more, okay? But every single result is being basically summarized already, okay? So these people find significant correlations between social networking site usage and other variables, okay? And basically, you know, and depression find. So they find significance between these issues. And that's something that you can already use as a result, okay? So X, Y, Z claim that there is significance between social networking site usage and depression. That would be, so you can put that into your paper, right? So again, you can, without even having reading the paper. So that's what I'm talking about, okay? Social comparison made on social networking sites. Okay, so there is also significance according to these authors, and depression. Okay, so people compare themselves maybe due to envy and all that stuff, whatever. So again, I want you basically to summarize 3 major ideas that your paper is about, and focus on that one only at the beginning. Come back to it later on, not now. And you can use that for your, basically for your seminar. So read abstracts, maybe in introductions, but not more, not at the beginning, okay? Because you need to become familiar with the literature, and then after that you can look into the details. Just summarize 3 basic ideas I mentioned before, and then you can basically, you know, identify the models that we're using. So maybe there is an autoregressive process here and there. You would recognize it already. Okay, so then you can check the equations and you can see what kind of empirical. I assume your paper that you're going to, I mean, the papers that you're going to read are going to be empirical ones most of the time. So then you can check what kind of models that we're using. That could be important. And maybe you can see what kind of, they always drop some equations, 1 or 2 at least. You should do that too as well. So if you basically, you know, you implement, let's say, an AR process, you should drop 1 or 2 equations so that the reader knows what kind of model that you're implementing. And that's what you would also need to figure out yourself, I think. So that's what you're supposed to do. Okay, but again, this is not always the case. So if the field is not close to the quantitative one, so let's say it's more likely psychology dominated, these people don't use any equations most of the time. But empirical finance, economics, stuff like that, you're always going to see some equations. So from the equations, you'll see basically what kind of models that we're implementing and collect the results regarding significance. Okay, so regarding significance of variables, models, stuff like that. So maybe you could add that to your list and that's it. And then put that aside because, again, you need to check the next one maybe. All right? So then maybe you can read the summary if you like to, but I think that should be enough. Okay, so if you read the abstracts, maybe the introduction, maybe you check out the equations and then the summary, that will be fine. Okay, just for a moment. So that takes maybe about 10 minutes for one paper, maybe, not more. Okay, so that's a good start. That's what I recommend. And then you can make some notes yourself. Okay, so these people, blah, 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 2019, find significant relationship between social networking sites, usage, and depression, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Okay, so there is significance regarding the results, according to these authors. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce those names. I think it's Korean, but I'm not sure. All right, is it clear? All right, guys, so you already have one sentence. Okay, I mean, it's not basically that much, but it's better than nothing, at least, at the beginning. So then, of course, you put those references also. And again, so I use Harvard List Citation. These are the authors, okay? And here is the title of the paper. So that's the title, okay? And it stops here. Then after that, you'll see basically the journal that has appeared. Okay, so Journal Affective Disorders. I have never heard that before. So again, I'm not basically familiar with that field as well. 248 is basically the volume number. Okay, so that is always a volume, and these are the pages. 7 pages, so 8 pages, if I count correctly. Okay, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4 people writing those. 8 pages. Okay? So it's not about the quantity, guys. Okay? Just for the record. So you need to have some mass, but I was talking about that, but it's not about the mass. Okay? It's the class, so quality, but it's supposed to be preferable. And that is, so I'm not going to give you any restrictions regarding the volume of your work. Okay? So there is no such thing as a minimum number of pages that you have to write. Okay? If 2 pages are enough, then 2 pages are enough. It's more the content density that you should try to maximize rather than the volume. Okay? The density has to be high. So I'm supposed to be like, okay, if I read one sentence though, I should stop and think, okay, it's not like, some entertaining text. So it could be very time consuming even for me if I read 1 or 2 pages from you. Okay, because if you provide a content with great density, then it's going to be also, for me, hard to digest it. Okay, but that's always a good sign. So rather try to maximize the density and not the number of pages that you are using. All right, or the number of words. I will not count words. I never counted words any time in my life. Okay, so my doctorate thesis itself has just 80 pages. Out of which basically I was using one paper. I mean, that was a collection of 3 papers, and one of them, it was co-written, okay, by me. So, and I spent almost 4 years writing that. Okay, so it's about 60 pages that I've written, and yeah, so 4 years, 15 pages per year, 1 page per month. You understand what I'm saying? But that's not what it is about, So. It's not basically the number of pages that are relevant. It's the density of the content that is going to be relevant, and I use that as a metric as well. All right, guys. Now, you need to read the references, maybe, so you check what happened before. And chances are, if you have a good source, it fits to your topic, chances are great that you're going to find another good source in that paper as well. So I was basically mentioning that before. That's what I always use. You know, you should read the rest, okay, of sources that these authors have used, because chances are great that you're going to find something appropriate, maybe 2 or 3. Again, and then you repeat the first step. So then, you know, it comes like, basically it grows exponentially. So again, then you check. I mean, you should not go back very far, okay, in time, because it's always the past that you're looking at. So if you look at the reference list of a paper, it's always it's past that you're checking. You should not, maybe not, you don't want to go very far, but maybe it could be the case though, right? So you simply just look at these things, which I did, and I was just, you know, randomly selected a paper that you know, sounds good. Relationship between online social networking and depression. That fits to the topic. So I would basically pre-select those. 2016, okay. The original paper that I clicked on was 2019. So why not checking out that one? Okay, and then you do the same things, checking the results, collecting 3 major ideas, maybe if there is 3. Maybe there's just one would be also fine. Okay, at least one. Then you put that into your paper and then you try to structure it. That's it. So you start from the beginning, and that's basically what my recommendation would be. Okay, so, and after that you also have a look into the future of that paper. So what you're doing is basically, and this is how you go on, all right? So if you go back to your source and you click on cited by blah, 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 169 people, chances are great that you're going to find something which is of value, okay, under those citations. So these were people who came after, who used that source that you would find appropriate after it appeared, okay? And at least you're going to find at least 1 or 2 other sources as well that you're going to like. So click on them and just basically do the same thing, and that's it. So after a while, let's say maybe an hour or 2, you're going to get at least 20, 25 sources based on your topic. All right. So, I mean, of course, you're going to become quicker, and then the results are going to be more or less familiar. But then you have an idea how the scientific community has addressed the topic that you want to basically write about. You understand that, guys? So it's going to become clear. And yeah, so that's simple, but I wished I had a search engine back in the day like this. But yeah, time changes, right? So it has advantages and disadvantages. Back in the day, it was very, very difficult to basically to access those sources. So I remember me traveling to different cities, traveling to different libraries just to get the appropriate sources that I wanted to. Okay, of course, nobody does that anymore. But that was more adventurous. So the number of sources that were available was very, very low compared to the sources of today. That was a disadvantage back then. Okay, and it was very difficult. Most of the time, it was very difficult to get those sources, especially back in 20 years ago. Not all these sources were digitalized. Okay, so I mean, they're digitalizing everything they can right now. So you can look into books from basically very old ones without, you know, going to the library and checking them out. Anyway, so that was the disadvantage back then. But the other thing, I must say, the quality of the sources was much better. Okay, so today it's much more difficult to basically to sort the information and to structure the information rather than getting it. You understand? So it has shifted basically to that one. And my tendency is, guys, I don't take it as an insult, but my tendency is if people see it online, they believe it. They tend to, okay? So that's my impression. And you should be very careful regarding this because, again, the majority of the information that you're getting is garbage, literally, you know? So that's a disadvantage of today's era. But on the other hand, you don't need to travel. So yeah. Yeah, well, okay, so that's always it. Again, so I remember me traveling the country just to get sources, okay, from libraries and maybe the library was closed, they had to come back the next day, so it was too late. Anyway, so that's that, okay, but that was 20 years ago. Now, again, it's shifted much, and then just because you read it online, especially, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is true, okay? Good. Now, if you click on basically cited by blah, 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 okay, there were 169 people quoting that source, which appeared, let's say, 2019, 5 years ago. Maybe it was written even earlier. Then this is the future. So then you can basically check those lists, okay? And of course, the number of citations tend to be less, okay? It's true because this paper came out earlier, right? 2020, for example. So you'll see that tendency, of course, but it doesn't really matter. So then you can select maybe that one. It sounds interesting. Teenager screens and social media, narrative review of reviews, right? Basically, so you have key studies already reviewed for you on that topic. That's a very good one. That appears to be like that. So, yeah. So just look it up, and of course you can access it, and then that's how you basically proceed. All right. Now, the most questions that I'm going to ask is, first off, if you basically, let's say you want to write something on your own initiative, and you basically asking me, I mean, I'm telling you what to write, okay, and what to write about most of the time, but you can also come up with your own ideas, and you're not sure whether your ideas would be basically good or not. Now, on that regard, usually you need to assume most of the time that I'm not familiar with the topic at all. That's a good assumption that you would have, okay? So since I'm not familiar with the topic, I mean, it's likely that I'm not familiar with the topic, but it's most likely, okay? I cannot tell you whether it's a good idea or not. This is something that you need to answer yourself. And you answer yourself by just basically looking into literature and trying to extract the scientific relevance, whether it's theoretical, empirical, or even practical, whatever, some sort of relevance you would try to extract from the literature. Okay, so how would you know basically it's a good idea to talk about social networking sites and depression? Because depression is affected by a lot of people, okay? It creates a lot of trauma, and that's number one. And a lot of people using social networking sites, that's number two. So then here comes the relevance with it, okay? And there is always a problem with it. So that's basically what you would try to address here, okay? So whether it's a good idea or not, this is something that you need to justify. So you are going to be the one trying to sell me your paper and trying to sell me your work that you're talking about. And that's something that you need to basically do yourself. So you are the one trying to sell me your paper, not the other way around, okay? And I told you how to do it, especially use the introduction for it, okay? So again, you need to have some sort of relevance attached to your work, and of any kind. More, maybe practical, okay? But I mean, that's always a good one, right? Because people like it. It comes back to reality, but it can be also a theoretical one. It doesn't really matter. So what kind of relevance does it have? As long as you can basically justify it, you can write basically anything you like to, okay? And you can publish anything you like, as long as you're able to justify the relevance of your work, okay? So again, and most of the time, I cannot answer the question whether it's going to be a good idea or not. I can give you instructions, basically what to focus on, or what I would focus on, or what I would look into first at the beginning, but maybe you'll find it's not a good idea even if you follow my advice, all right? So that's that. Now regarding basically the second one, I'm not providing any feedback, guys, regarding preliminary versions, because I'm not supposed to. It would not be fair to your fellow students, okay? So that's a major issue, because then I would need to offer that to everyone. And this is something that I cannot do, okay? So please don't feel offended if I do not comment your table of contents or whatever, okay? Whatever you're basically providing me with. because I'm not supposed to. I need to offer that service to everyone. But why would I? So in that regard, because that's something that you need to do yourself. Now, what is important for me, I hope this is already clear. Have a look into introduction. Falsifiability is an issue. Okay, so that's something that is going to be important. Okay, so introduction to the theory is going to be relevant, but don't talk about basically, let's say, topics in the lecture that much. So you don't need to, derive things, blah, 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 whatever, because that's not going to be your topic. Okay, so your topic is not going to be the lecture's topic that you're trying to repeat. Okay, I use those things just to build a foundation on empirical works that you're going to look at. So that's not what I'm going to basically, presenting. I mean, that's not what you're supposed to present. I mean, you can, again, so you need to drop equations here and there. You need to tell me what kind of test statistics you use, what kind of tests are you applying, this and that, but that's going to be fine. But you're not supposed to basically derive things based on that, because that's not going to be your topic, as I think. Okay? Now, detailed elaboration on theoretical concepts is not the subject of your term paper. Okay, so I want you to clarify that. This is not what you're supposed to look at. Okay, so I want you to be basically to remember that. Okay. Focus on the topic. So if you write basically some empirical stuff regarding implementation of a certain model, your goal is not to provide detailed description on the model. Like, let's say you write something about AR processes and stuff like this, and you kind of develop stationary conditions that I did. That's not what it is about. Okay, so maybe you have a second order autoregressive processing, and then you would try to prove the triangle conditions. But why would you? I did it in a lecture, so you don't have to. Okay, so if I did it in a lecture, you don't have to. You're supposed to just tell me what you're using from it. Okay, if stationary is relevant, then you can refer to the triangle conditions if you like to, if you use an AR2 model, but if it's relevant, okay? So don't use it, I mean, if it's not important, all right? But it's important for me, basically, what you also try to connect your paper to the scientific community, guys. So that's going to be important for me. And you do this by using a literature review. So you add something to the discussion, okay? That's what I would try to basically emphasize here. That is going to be an issue, okay? So that is, I mean, your work, I mean, let's assume you're going to do something empirical. This is basically the major point, but then you need to add something to the discussion. And I want you to participate in these discussions. So you are using, okay, so if you say like, okay, if I use this country, this time frame, this data, blah, 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 this is the result that's coming out, and X, Y, Z was using something else. That's why they had different results. So if I have basically a higher frequency, you have different results coming out. Okay, that might indicate that the results are not consistent. Maybe you can write something like this, okay? Depending on your results, whatever. All right, so general principles are important, especially falsifiability. I talked about that before, so yeah. Okay, try to use that quick. Do you have to develop hypotheses? And the answer is no. Okay? You check the results first and then draw your conclusions later, and not the other way around. You're not supposed to draw your conclusions first and check the results later. But, I mean, you can, but sometimes it's not really consistent. So you don't need to develop those when it comes to when it comes to empirical work. You can, okay? So there is basically, but the necessary condition is that you are very familiar with it, extremely familiar with the topic, which is, I don't really think that you're going to benefit from it. There might be some colleagues who might disagree, okay? But that's just me. So why would you draw your conclusions first and then you look into the data, if you have the opportunity to look into the data first and then to draw your conclusions, right? But that's just me. You can also basically say, okay, X, Y, Z, hypothesize this and that. That would come out. Or this model basically would conclude this and that. But again, why would you? So you can look into the data first and then your conclusions and then try to build it back if you like to. All right, so again, But this is just my opinion. You don't need to follow this approach. You can develop hypotheses on your own, okay? But I'm not really impressed by that, to be honest, okay? Because that requires extensive reading, and which most people don't have time to, all right? So they don't, or let's say they don't spend sufficient time. All right, and do you have to explain the methodology? No, you don't need to. Not the methodology itself. Again, my comparison is you need to drive the car, but you don't need to build the car. I was studying how to build a car, but you need to drive it predominantly. Now you need to open the car a little bit, you know, and tell me what you're seeing, you know, where the engine is and stuff like this, but that's basically the comparison that I try to use. So that's not your main focus. That's the topic of the lecture, so that's not going to be your major issue, all right? You don't need to basically derive the chi-square distribution. That was done 100 years ago, okay? So you don't need to repeat that again. Somebody did the job for you. So you can make a reference that XYZ has shown that the test statistics follows the chi-square distribution. That's it, okay? Because we need to progress, you know, you understand what I'm saying? So, yeah, that was done already. So it was done, you don't need to show it again, all right? That's part of the lecture, all right? Same applies basically any statistical measure and so on. So that's a good example. You don't need to. It was done already. So if it's done, you don't need to do it again, okay? But it's, for me, it's important to see how you're making your test decisions. What basically, under the principle of falsifiability, that's a good point, okay? So then you need to basically adjust your results, and that's it, okay, guys? So under the assumption of falsifiability. So if let's say, if I have your data that you work with, and then I use basically, you know, the same methodology, that I have the opportunity to falsify your results if basically it comes to that. All right? So under this, basically under this principle, you're going to write your paper like that. So that is going to be falsifiable, that's going to be important. But other than that, that should be fine. All right, guys? Yeah, so that was it, okay? And I hope this is becoming clear. You're going to get an assignment where you would need to apply those things, okay? So I will give you a specific topic of which you're going to write something regarding its literature, and I will also give you some empirical stuff there where you would need to document things, and maybe you would put that together, all right? So there's going to be 1 or 2 assignments based on things like this, so then you do something empirical as well. Okay, guys? Okay, following these principles, and I hope, yeah, it become clear then. All right, yeah, that was it for today. I apologize for taking your time. Next time I'm going to finish earlier. Yeah, take care. That was it for today. Thanks. All right.